I found out my family was secretly spying on me through a shared device, so I quietly gathered evidence and gave them a big surprise. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and this all started when I moved out of my parents' house into my own apartment a little over a year ago. Like a lot of families, mine can be a bit overprotective. They've always insisted they're just looking out for me. But even as a grown man, it sometimes felt like they wanted to keep an eye on every step I took. So, when they insisted on installing a security system in my apartment, I didn't really think too much of it. My mom pushed it hard, saying it was for my safety. She seemed genuinely worried, and my dad backed her up, talking about how it would help them sleep at night knowing I was secure. I figured, why not? It seemed harmless enough. The device itself was one of those all-in-one security systems with a camera, motion sensors, and remote access. They even paid for it and had it professionally installed, which honestly felt like a nice gesture. I didn't exactly want to say no to free security, and the setup looked decent. The system would send alerts to my phone whenever someone came to the door or there was unusual activity in the apartment. At first, I even appreciated it. I could check the camera feed while I was at work or out of town, and it gave me a sense of security, especially living alone. But then, little things started to feel off. It started subtly. During one family dinner, my mom casually asked me how my new job project was going, mentioning specifics that I hadn't even told her about. I figured I must have mentioned it in passing, or maybe my sister overheard something, but it was strange. Then, one night, my sister asked me about a friend who had visited. Now, this friend isn't someone I'm close with, and I didn't tell anyone they were coming over. My sister's exact words were, "How's your friend, the one with the blue hat?" I froze. There was no way they could have known, unless they'd seen him, but I brushed it off, telling myself I was just overthinking things. It wasn't long after that when I started piecing things together. Every time I left my apartment, I'd get a text from my mom or dad, asking where I was going or reminding me to be safe. It was like clockwork. If I went out late, my phone would light up with messages from my family, asking if I was okay. One night, I decided to test it. I left my apartment late, didn't tell anyone where I was going, and drove around the block before coming back. Within minutes, my mom texted, "Are you going out somewhere?" That's when I started to realize that the security system wasn't just for my safety, it was for them to keep tabs on me. So, I decided to dig into the system settings to see if there was any way they could actually be tracking me. What I found was disturbing. Not only did they have full access to the camera feed and notifications, but they were receiving every single alert that was sent to my phone. Every time I walked in or out, they got a notification. Every time I brought someone over, they knew. But it didn't stop there. I saw that they had access to audio recordings too. There were several logs showing audio was accessed remotely, sometimes at odd hours. My family had been listening in on conversations I had in my own home. After seeing this, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. It's one thing to have a security camera, but listening in on my private conversations? That felt like a complete invasion. I decided to confront my sister first because I figured she might let something slip. When I brought it up, she tried to act clueless, but she let slip something that confirmed everything. She mentioned that they were just making sure I was okay. That was all I needed to hear. She tried to backtrack, saying it was out of concern and that I was overreacting, but I knew now that my family had been spying on me. I went back to the system settings and pulled up as much history as I could. It showed logs of both video and audio access stretching back to almost the day I'd moved in. They hadn't just been watching, they'd been listening to everything. The privacy I thought I had in my own home was nothing but an illusion. It was hard to process. I sat on this information for a few days, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to just cut them off completely, change the locks, and get a new system without telling them. But another part of me felt betrayed in a way I couldn't ignore. They'd taken something as personal as my privacy and twisted it under the excuse of safety. It made me question every conversation we'd had since I moved out. Every time they'd asked about my life, had they already known everything before I even told them? In the end, I decided enough was enough. This wasn't just about a security system, it was about control. They wanted to keep tabs on me like I was still a kid, like they had a right to know everything I did. I knew I had to confront them, and I had to take back my own life. But I wasn't sure how they'd react, and honestly, that scared me more than anything. I had no idea what kind of response to expect, but one thing was certain, I wasn't going to keep living with them monitoring my every move. After figuring out my family was spying on me through my own security system, I knew I couldn't just let it slide. The next weekend, I went over to my parents' house to confront them. I didn't want to do this over the phone. I wanted to see their faces, see how they'd react when I laid out what I'd found. As soon as I walked in, my mom greeted me with a big smile and asked if I was doing okay. I went straight to the point, saying I knew about the device and how they'd been using it to track my movements and listen in. My parents looked at each other, clearly caught off guard. My dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while my mom's smile faded as she mumbled something about just wanting to protect me. They tried to act like it was all innocent, saying the device was only installed for my safety. My mom went on about how the world is dangerous and how they'd sleep better at night knowing I was okay. But the more they talked, the more it felt like they were dodging the issue. My sister, who had been sitting quietly up until then, jumped in to defend them. She said they were just looking out for me and that I was making a big deal out of nothing. When I told them that my privacy wasn't something they could just overlook, my mom's face dropped. She started pulling out all the worried parent lines. She told me they'd done so much to make sure I was safe and that I should be grateful. My dad added that they didn't mean any harm, they were only trying to help. They insisted I was overreacting and being unreasonable. I didn't let up. I told them that spying on me wasn't normal and that I was planning to change the device settings to remove their access. My mom's expression immediately changed to one of pure panic. She started talking about how dangerous it would be if they couldn't keep an eye on things. My dad backed her up, saying it was reckless and irresponsible to shut them out when they were only trying to keep me safe. The guilt trip was intense, but I stood firm, telling them it wasn't their decision to make. The confrontation didn't go well, and they wouldn't back down. My mom started crying, asking me why I would cut them off like this after everything they'd done for me. She brought up times they'd helped me, saying I was being ungrateful. My sister kept throwing in comments about how I was making everyone worry unnecessarily. The whole conversation felt twisted, like they were turning the blame on me for wanting my own space. When I got home, I called a friend and told him everything. He was shocked and suggested that I consider going no contact until my family respected my boundaries. It sounded drastic, but I was starting to think he was right. I decided to change my home security system entirely. I didn't want to risk them finding a way around it, so I got a new system and made sure they had zero access. I didn't tell them about it. I just quietly cut them off from my security feed and went about my life. As expected, my phone started blowing up. My parents and sister sent messages constantly, asking me if I was safe, telling me how worried they were, and trying to guilt me for shutting them out. They called at all hours, acting like my silence was some kind of crisis. My mom even sent me messages, hinting that I was putting myself in danger without them watching over me. Soon after, my sister began sending these passive-aggressive texts. She'd say things like, "It's a shame you don't care about your safety anymore," or, "Guess you don't need family when you've got all the privacy you want." It was clear they were trying to make me feel bad for setting boundaries. At first, their comments got to me. I couldn't help but wonder if I'd overreacted by cutting them off. But every time I thought about the audio logs and the extent of their surveillance, I knew I'd made the right call. My friend reassured me, reminding me that I had every right to feel safe and private in my own home. He pointed out that my family's reaction only proved they didn't respect my boundaries. So, I resolved to stand firm. They'd crossed a line, and I wasn't going to just go back to letting them control my life. Since blocking their access to my security system, I felt hyper-aware of any signs they might still be keeping tabs on me. I found myself double-checking my phone and any shared accounts to make sure there weren't other ways they could track me. This experience made me question everything, and I became more vigilant than ever. It was exhausting, but I felt it was necessary to fully reclaim my independence. Despite the barrage of texts and calls, I stayed resolute. I ignored the guilt-tripping, the passive-aggressive comments, and the emotional manipulation. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had to draw a line. My privacy wasn't something to be bargained with. I deserved to live without feeling like I was constantly being watched. In the end, I came to a solid conclusion: my family's boundaries, or lack of them, were the real problem. I couldn't keep sacrificing my peace of mind just to make them comfortable. It was time for me to take control of my life on my own terms. It wasn't long after cutting my family off from my security system that they took things up a notch. One Saturday morning, I was lounging around in my apartment when I heard a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I looked through the peephole, there were my parents standing outside with worried expressions. My mom had this intense look, while my dad stood behind her, arms crossed, like he was prepared for a confrontation. I opened the door, and before I could even say anything, my mom launched into a monologue about how they hadn't heard from me, how they were worried sick, and how my sudden change in behavior was scaring them. They just walked right in, looking around like they were expecting to see some dramatic reason for why I'd decided to block them out of my life. When I told them they needed to respect my boundaries, my mom's face went pale, and she started crying, asking why I was treating them this way. She talked about how they'd only ever wanted to protect me and that I was acting like they were strangers. My dad, on the other hand, looked around the apartment, barely even glancing at me. Then, out of nowhere, they started blaming my friend. They said he'd been a bad influence on me and had changed me. They claimed he'd brainwashed me into turning against them, as if I couldn't make decisions on my own. Then came the financial threat. My mom, still in her emotional tone, reminded me that they'd helped with some of my expenses over the years. She hinted that if I was going to act like this, I couldn't expect them to keep supporting me. My dad finally spoke up, saying they couldn't keep throwing money at someone who didn't respect them. That one hit a nerve, but I quickly realized something that made me feel strangely calm. I didn't rely on them financially anymore. I'd been on my own, working hard to build a life without their help, so I wasn't scared of losing any financial support. I told them that, letting them know I didn't need their money and wasn't going to let it control me. That only made my mom's emotional manipulation worse. She started talking about how they'd sacrificed for me, how they'd always been there for me, and that this was how I was repaying them. She said I was acting like a stranger and that if I didn't let them help me, then I would lose my family entirely. She even called it an ultimatum. I stood my ground and said that my privacy wasn't negotiable, no matter what they threatened to take away. I think she realized at that point that I wasn't backing down, but she kept up the guilt trip, reminding me of all the times they'd protected me growing up, as if that gave them a lifelong right to control me. The conversation was going nowhere, so I firmly told them that they needed to leave if they couldn't respect my boundaries. My dad gave me the silent treatment, his usual tactic when he wanted to guilt me without saying anything. He just stood there, staring, while my mom kept pleading and blaming. Finally, they left, but it wasn't over. Within an hour, my family group chat was buzzing. My parents had posted these cryptic messages about losing a son and how heartbreaking it was to be shut out. My mom even posted a long message about how sometimes even those you love can turn their backs on you. I could feel the drama brewing. Soon enough, my phone started lighting up with messages from extended family members, cousins, aunts, and uncles, all asking what was going on. Some of them were polite, asking if I was okay, but others immediately took my parents' side, urging me to make peace and not be so harsh. I couldn't handle the constant pressure and decided to block my family members temporarily to clear my head. Even though I knew I was doing what was right for me, it felt surreal. Here I was, just trying to set some boundaries, and it felt like I was being forced into a battle with the people who were supposed to care about me. I wondered how things had gotten so twisted that privacy was now seen as some kind of betrayal. After blocking them, I felt a mixture of relief and a strange sense of guilt. It was like I could finally breathe, but at the same time, there was this nagging worry about the fallout and whether this was the point of no return. I tried to focus on getting back to my routine, but the emotional toll was heavier than I'd expected. Thankfully, I had friends who understood. I leaned on them more, and they were there for me, reminding me that I wasn't wrong for wanting my own space and privacy. They helped me research ways to deal with family boundaries, giving me tools to handle the manipulation and emotional blackmail that I'd been dealing with my whole life. It was comforting to know that I wasn't alone in this, and that other people had gone through similar situations. Over the next few days, I slowly began to feel more empowered in my decision. My family had made it clear they weren't going to respect my boundaries unless I took a stand. For once, I felt like I had control over my own life, and even though it came at a price, I was determined not to let them pull me back into their grip. I realized I could have relationships on my terms, even if it meant creating some distance with my family. Moving forward, I knew it was going to be a challenge. I couldn't predict how my family would react to being cut off, but I had reached my limit. This was a line I wasn't going to cross back over. I was done being under their watchful eye, and I was done letting them manipulate me into feeling like I owed them something for just wanting to live my life independently. After the last blow-up with my family, I realized that things weren't going to get better on their own. They'd made it clear that my boundaries didn't matter to them, and I knew I couldn't keep living in this constant state of surveillance and manipulation. So I decided to take things a step further and reached out to a lawyer to see what my options were. When I explained the situation to him, he didn't seem surprised. He'd heard similar stories from others dealing with intrusive family members. He told me that, technically, what my family had been doing, spying on me through the security device without my consent, wasn't just invasive, it was illegal. He mentioned that I could file a restraining order to formally protect my privacy and set clear legal boundaries. The thought of a restraining order felt extreme, but knowing there was an option gave me a strange sense of relief. I wasn't completely powerless in this. I hadn't planned on telling my family about the consultation, but somehow, my sister found out. I'm not sure how, but my guess is she still had ways to keep tabs on me through mutual friends or some other means. Not long after, I received a flood of angry messages from my family. My sister sent a long, angry text accusing me of being dramatic and disloyal. My dad's message was more direct, implying that if I went through with any legal nonsense, they would retaliate. They claimed they were hurt and betrayed by my disrespect. But not once did they acknowledge my reasons for wanting privacy. A few days later, my parents showed up at my apartment again, this time making a full scene. They were loud, and it was clear they wanted everyone in my building to know they were there. My mom was in tears, practically shouting about how I was abandoning my family and how much they'd sacrificed for me. My dad was in the background, arms crossed, looking angry and disappointed, like I was a child who had done something shameful. The neighbors started peeking through their doors, trying to see what was going on. At this point, I realized I couldn't handle this alone. I calmly stepped back inside and called the police, explaining that my parents were causing a disturbance. The police arrived quickly, and I explained the situation. My parents were furious, calling it a betrayal and accusing me of humiliating them in front of the whole building. But I stood my ground. The police asked them to leave, and eventually they did, though not without a final barrage of accusations about how selfish I'd become. Things didn't quiet down after that incident. My sister took to social media, posting vague but clearly directed messages about people who don't appreciate their family, and how heartbreaking it is when someone you love turns their back on you. She didn't mention me by name, but anyone who knew us would understand who she was talking about. My extended family, who'd already been bombarding me with messages, started reaching out more. They'd heard a twisted version of the story that painted me as unstable, ungrateful, and disrespectful. It was like my parents were building an army of allies against me. Fortunately, my friends were there for me. They knew the real story and made sure I didn't let the negativity get to me. They reminded me that I wasn't crazy for wanting my own life in my own space. They supported me in setting up new rules around my apartment. I put up signs by my door that clearly stated no entry without permission, just to make sure there was no confusion. I wanted to establish, once and for all, that my home was my own, and they couldn't just barge in whenever they felt like it. Then, out of the blue, I got a message from my mom. It was almost as if the last few weeks hadn't happened. She wrote that they were willing to forgive me if I apologized and came back to them. It felt surreal reading it, like they thought this was all just a phase, and that I'd be back to playing the obedient son. I didn't respond the way they wanted. Instead, I replied that I had nothing to apologize for, and that I wasn't going to apologize for setting boundaries that they had repeatedly disrespected. After that message, I decided it was time to go fully no contact. I blocked my family across all platforms and let my extended family members know that I needed space and wouldn't be answering messages related to my parents. I didn't make a scene about it, I just quietly disconnected. The drama on their end continued, but without access to me, it slowly started to fade out of my direct line of sight. With the distance, I began to notice changes in myself. My mind felt clearer, and the constant tension I'd been carrying started to lift. I didn't realize how deeply the situation had been affecting me until I stepped away from it. For the first time, I was living without the fear of being watched or controlled, and it felt like a weight had finally been lifted. At the lawyer's recommendation, I decided to go ahead with filing the restraining order. It felt like the final step in protecting myself legally, solidifying the boundaries I'd already tried to set. The process wasn't easy, and part of me felt strange doing it to my own family, but I knew it was necessary. I needed something concrete in place to keep them from escalating even further. Filing the restraining order felt like a closing chapter. It was a way of saying that I was done being pulled back into their drama and control. After finalizing the restraining order, I decided it was time to make a real change. I'd spent months dealing with drama, manipulation, and guilt, and I wanted a fresh start somewhere my family couldn't easily reach. So I packed up, found a job opportunity in a new city, and moved. I didn't tell anyone in my family where I was going, just a few close friends. For the first time, it felt like I could actually breathe. Settling into my new apartment felt like the start of a new chapter. Without the constant messages, random visits, or guilt-inducing phone calls, my mental health started improving almost immediately. I hadn't even realized how much of a toll their interference had taken on me until it was gone. I'd gotten so used to the weight of their expectations that being free of it felt almost surreal. I was able to focus on my new job without the constant worry of being watched or criticized. The job itself was everything I'd hoped for. I'd landed a position that matched my skills and allowed me to grow professionally. With no family drama in the background, I threw myself into work, eager to prove myself. Within a few months, my efforts started paying off. My manager noticed the quality of my work, and I got a promotion. The difference was clear. Without my family's constant interference, I was thriving. Then, just as I was getting comfortable, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my family, forwarded from my old address. I didn't need to open it to know what it would say. Another guilt trip, another plea for forgiveness, another attempt to pull me back. I threw it away without a second thought. They tried sending a few more letters, but I refused to let them drag me back into their world of control and manipulation. Now that I was away from my family's reach, I started dating again. For the first time, I didn't have to worry about my mom interrogating me about every person I spent time with or my dad's passive-aggressive comments about my choices. I could explore relationships without that constant shadow of judgment hanging over me. I actually got to know people without feeling like I had to keep anything hidden. Occasionally there were brief moments of doubt. I'd wonder if maybe I'd been too harsh or if there was a way to rebuild a relationship with my family on my terms. But whenever those thoughts crept in, my friends reminded me of why I'd chosen this path. They helped me see that the boundaries I'd set were for my own well-being and that I wasn't obligated to sacrifice my mental health just to keep my family comfortable. To make sure I was really healing, I started seeing a therapist. Therapy gave me the tools to understand the unhealthy dynamics I'd grown up with and taught me how to avoid falling back into old patterns. My therapist helped me work through the guilt and resentment, and slowly I felt the anger lift. Instead of carrying it around, I was learning to let go. Around that time, I learned from a mutual friend that my family hadn't stopped talking about me. Apparently, they were still spreading their version of the story to anyone who would listen, framing me as the ungrateful son who'd abandoned them. At first, I thought about confronting them again, but then I decided it wasn't worth the energy. I was past the point of caring what they said. I didn't need their approval or validation anymore. As I settled into my new life, I made friends who respected my boundaries and encouraged my independence. I found a social circle where I didn't have to explain myself or constantly justify my choices. These new friends became my support system, helping me move forward. They respected my need for privacy and didn't pry into every aspect of my life, and I realized how rare and valuable that truly was. I also started picking up hobbies I'd always been interested in but never had the space for before. I took up painting and writing, two things I'd always found therapeutic but hadn't felt free to explore with my family watching. I poured my experiences into my art and writing, finding a way to express everything I'd been through. It was like I was reclaiming parts of myself I'd lost over the years. Work continued to go well, and after a few more months, I was promoted again. The feeling of achieving something purely for myself, without anyone holding me back, was incredible. Looking back, I realized just how much my family's negativity had affected my self-worth and career. Now, with them out of the picture, I was reaching my full potential, free from the constraints they'd put on me. Then, one day, I got a message from an old friend back home. She'd heard about everything that had happened, and asked if I'd thought about reconnecting with my family. She said they missed me and wondered if I'd consider reaching out to mend things. I didn't even have to think about it. I told her politely that I'd moved on and wasn't interested in rehashing the past. For the first time, I felt no hesitation. I was finally done with that chapter of my life. That evening, I sat down and wrote out everything I'd gone through since setting those boundaries. It was a personal reflection, a way to capture my journey and remind myself how far I'd come. As I wrote, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't felt before. I was grateful for the freedom I'd fought so hard to create, and I knew that no matter what happened, I was never going back to the life I'd left behind. Just as I was settling into my new life, my parents showed up unannounced at my workplace. I hadn't seen or heard from them in months, thanks to the restraining order and going no contact, but here they were, standing in the lobby, clearly determined to talk to me. They must have found out where I worked through some other family member or mutual friend who still had contact with them. The receptionist looked over at me with raised eyebrows, clearly concerned, and I knew this wouldn't be a simple chat. As I walked up to them, my parents immediately started their old routine, talking about how much I'd hurt them by cutting them off. My mom's voice wavered, saying they'd done everything for me, and my dad stood there with a hardened look, arms crossed, as if daring me to ignore them. They didn't care that we were in a public space. They seemed determined to guilt-trip me, hoping I'd break. But instead of feeling pressured, I felt an unexpected calm come over me. I calmly told them that if they didn't leave, I would have to call security. My mom looked stunned, and my dad's expression shifted to anger, as if he couldn't believe I was standing my ground. Other employees and a few clients were starting to notice the tension, and I knew I had to end this quickly. When they still wouldn't leave, I told the receptionist to call security. As the guards approached, my parents finally backed off, but not without a final attempt to make a scene. My mom's voice rose, accusing me of abandoning my family and making it clear to everyone in the lobby that I was the ungrateful one. But I didn't flinch. I stayed silent, watching as the guards escorted them out. After they left, a few CO workers came over, asking if I was okay and offering their support. They'd seen enough of the confrontation to understand the basics. It was reassuring to know that, even in a new city, I wasn't alone. My boss pulled me aside later, letting me know that I didn't have to worry about them showing up again. The security team had been notified to keep them out if they tried returning. A few days later, I received another letter from my mom. It was several pages long, filled with all the same phrases she'd used before, how I'd broken the family, how much they'd sacrificed for me, and how all they wanted was a place in my life. She framed it as if my need for privacy was some kind of betrayal, as if I'd chosen to hurt them intentionally. But this time, as I read through the letter, I felt detached. I could see the emotional manipulation for what it was. The words didn't carry the same weight they once did. In my next therapy session, I brought up the letter. My therapist pointed out how my parents were using guilt as a tool to control me, just like they had in the past. This conversation with my therapist helped me understand that their need for control wasn't about love, it was about power. It solidified my decision to stay firm and not let their words sway me. Not long after, I got another letter, this time from my dad. He didn't bother with emotional pleas. Instead, he went straight to an ultimatum. He claimed that unless I reestablished contact, they would cut me out of the will. I almost laughed when I read it. They hadn't financially supported me in years, and I'd worked hard to build my own life, independent of them. The will was the last thing I cared about, and I think they knew that. But the attempt to use money as leverage made it clear they weren't interested in my well-being, just in keeping control. Then my aunt reached out, trying to mediate. She asked if I'd be willing to sit down with my parents and work things out. I appreciated her attempt, but I let her know I needed peace, and that I wasn't interested in reconciling under terms that only served my parents. I told her that any contact would have to respect my boundaries, and I wouldn't compromise on that. Surprisingly, my sister also reached out. Unlike my parents, she seemed genuine. She apologized for her part in the past drama and acknowledged that she'd been wrong to take sides. I was cautious, but I told her that if she wanted a relationship, it would have to be on my terms, with full respect for my privacy and independence. She agreed, and we started slowly rebuilding trust. She didn't push or pry, which was a refreshing change. For the first time, I felt like we might be able to have a real relationship based on mutual respect. With each day, I felt more secure in the life I'd built for myself, free from the constant interference that had once felt so normal. I found myself looking forward to the future, knowing it was mine to shape. My life was no longer defined by my family's demands or expectations. I'd set my own boundaries and chosen my own path. One evening, I sat down to journal about everything that had happened, reflecting on the journey I'd been through, from the initial shock of realizing my family had been watching me to the long process of standing up for my independence. It had been a difficult road, but now, looking back, I could see how far I'd come. I'd found peace, and for the first time, I felt genuinely grateful for the freedom I'd fought to create. This chapter of my life was finally closed. I was free to live on my terms, without the weight of my family's control pulling me back, and as I put down my pen, I realized that I was no longer defined by my family's demands. I was finally, fully myself.